thinking about going out and buying an older Mercedes Benz, this is a video alert. You may have heard me harp about rust problems in the past, and after seeing this video, my harping is going to be well founded. You know, there's not an old Mercedes Benz out there that's worth fixing if it's all rusty. I mean, I've had customers write and say, can you get me brand new quarter panels for my 123, or can you get me new floors for my 116? I'm sorry, but there's enough good cars still out there that you don't need to go out and buy an old rusty one and then expect to start cutting and welding in sheet metal. These cars are just not worth that much effort. So when you go looking at an old Benz, one of the first things you want to do is look very closely, and I'm going to emphasize the word very closely, for any signs of rust. Now, this friend of mine recently purchased this 240D here, and take a look at it. It doesn't look too bad. You don't see any rust on the car. There's a little bit of rust back here in this wheel well, but there's no rust holes in the body. You look underneath the rocker panels and the jack points, that's a real common problem, rust. There's no evidence of rust here. And when he was talking to the owner, and by the way, the owner was a lady, she told him that the car had been garaged most of his life. He drove the car and thought, man, this is a nice 240D. So he bought it and drove it home. And it wasn't until a couple days later, when he was cruising down the road with his family, his daughter says, hey Dad, I can see light here in the rear floorboards. And then he started looking more closely, and then he was literally horrified at what he found. Let's take a look, and I'll show you just exactly the problems he found with this car after he looked at it very closely. If a car's been subject to road salt, you'll usually see outward visual signs of it. Like this 300 SEL here that came out of Canada. This is obviously a road salt problem here. A lot of times those problems will show up underneath the fender wells, on the outside of the lower parts of the fenders. So it doesn't take a lot of detective work if you're looking for road salt damage. But what about rainwater damage? This is a little more subtle, a little more hidden. These are from cars that haven't been subject to road salt, but they've been in environments where there's a lot of rain, like the Pacific Northwest. And maybe they haven't been garaged as much as they should have. So what my friend found was that the rear sections of both rear floorboards were rusted through. We're talking holes in them that you could see the road. Upon a closer inspection underneath the doors, the bottoms of the doors are rusted through. And then of course he went into the trunk and started poking around and lifted out the spare tire, and he's got rust holes in the spare tire well. And you're probably saying, well, Kent, how did those get there? Well, let me explain. On these old Mercedes, particularly the old 114, 115, 116, and 123s that used rubber windshield and rear window seals, once they dry out and lose their seal, this is a very common source of water leaks here. And so the water can leak through the front windshield and roll down to the back of the floorboards and settle there and rust through over time. Water can leak into the trunk and rust through the trunk. And of course, rainwater going down the windows through those wiper seals can eventually rust out the bottoms of the doors. So this is typical of a car that has been in a high rain environment. So anytime, and I mean anytime, you're going out to look for an older Mercedes Benz, open the trunk. Lift out the spare tire. Look in those sidewells. Even if you have to remove the plastic or carpet sidewall covers right here, get in there and take a close. Remove the carpets and look underneath. And always get down on your knees if you have to and look along the bottom edges of all four doors. This will give you a clue as to whether this car has been subject to that kind of a problem. Now, okay, what if you end up buying a car like my friend did and needs to repair some of these? If they're non-structural, you don't need to weld in new metal. There's another way that I found is a very effective way to repair this type of non-structural, and I'm going to emphasize non-structural rust out. Let's take a look at that in detail. You know, I've been dealing with rust on old cars since I was a little kid. Take a look at this picture here of this rusty Model T my brother brought home. Now talk about extreme rust. And when I bought a 1934 Ford when I was 15, The very first attempt at fixing the rust holes in the lower rockers was masking tape. Yeah, that's right. I didn't know much else, but I put masking tape over all the holes on the lower part of the body, and then I primered the body. It didn't look too bad from about 30 feet away. But since then, I've always been on the quest to find a really good way to deal with what I call non-structural rust, where you don't have to come in and do a lot of welding and patching. And remember, welding is not always the answer like some people think. I had a fellow bring down a 4.5 out of Canada. He spent $5,000 having new rockers welded into the car. And I put the car up on the lift and I said, look at this. He was just shocked. The rust had all started again where the wells were made, and those wells weren't treated. And if they can't be treated, you're actually going to have accelerated rust. So none of that $5,000 worth of work did anything. It actually created a bigger problem. So welding is not always the answer, especially if both sides of the weld are not treated. I feel now, after using a lot of different products, that Miracle Paint is the #1 product to use for these type of rust problems. It literally goes in and it likes bonding to rust. You don't need to sand all the rust off. It's not a rust converter, so it won't come back. It's literally a bonding agent that seals rock hard. It's almost like porcelain when it dries. And it will prevent any moisture from coming back into the rust to keep it growing. That's what causes rust to continue to grow. And as I used this product, I began to realize this stuff is so strong. What would happen if I combined it with fiberglass cloth, you know, like building a boat? And then I began to realize as I experimented with different types of fiberglass cloth that I could use Miracle Paint and cloth to bridge over and strengthen holes like you've just seen in this 240D here. The trick is in the type of fiberglass you use. For instance, you can use a very thin, tightly woven fiberglass cloth where you only have a minor surfaced or heavy pitting and you just want to strengthen the metal up a little bit. Then you use this flexible cloth where you're working around a curved surface, like under the 123 battery box, which is a very common problem for rust out. And when those holes rust out under the battery, water will be going back to those back floors and rusting through your floors as well. Then when you get into something like the trunk, where you have actual rust holes that are showing all over the place, you can use fiberglass mesh, similar to what they use when they're building boats, laying up boats with polyester resin. And you can add 1, 2, and even up to 3 layers, make the sizing progressively get larger so it's kind of tapered. And you bond this with the Miracle Paint to the rusty metal, and you would be amazed. I have made repairs on rusty Mercedes that I've seen 10 years later, and it is still intact. And then for real problems, where you're almost getting into structural issues like those rear floorboards, you want the really heavy. This is a very heavy cloth, custom made, that we sell on our website. It has a very thick weave on one side and a mesh on the other side, and you can see how stiff this is. So if you use this type of cloth when you're trying to build up strength in floorboards, this is the product to use. So I'm very pleased about Miracle Paint. And we sell it all over the place, and people love it. And people who've used it have written back and said, man, you just saved me thousands of dollars because I didn't have to take the car into a body shop and have all this new metal welded in. Now, when it comes to structural areas like suspension points or key body locations, this isn't going to work. And that's when you're getting into issues where I would say, do you really want to even keep the car? Earlier in the video, I said there's no old Mercedes worth fixing up that's rusty. I should have qualified that by saying no common older Mercedes. Obviously, if you had an old 190 SL, 300 SL, or some rare convertible, yes, it might be worth fixing if it is rusty. But for these old daily drivers that you and I drive every day, I would recommend, if you see a car with rust, that you run the other way. If you accidentally buy a car that has too much rust on it, get rid of it and go find another one. And oh, by the way, the owner has decided he's not going to fix this car up. It's just too much work. So buyer beware, you might see this on eBay someday. Miracle Paint is not an inexpensive product, but I can guarantee you it is well worth it. In many cases, you do not need a large amount of it to fix some of these small rust holes or rusty areas in the car. So on our website, we sell Miracle Paint. We do package it in the pint cans as well as the quart cans to make it more affordable. And in our kits, I include instructions. I've written a complete manual on how to use Miracle Paint for all types of repairs on rusty cars, and it works on other types of rust too, as well as equipment and even things around salt water. Some of our kits, we package the thinner type fiberglass cloths in these packages, and we also sell the thicker mesh, the ones I showed you earlier. We sell that by the foot or the yard, and then we include these throwaway brushes, because once you use Miracle Paint, you throw away the brush. And the other thing is, I'm going to warn you right now, if you deal with this stuff, there's two things you have to remember. Never get it on your skin. It won't come off until your skin dries. And number two, if you seal the lid without cleaning it thoroughly or protecting it with something like saran wrap after you've used it, you will not be able to get the lid off. So that gives you a little idea on just how strong this product is. So if you're interested in Miracle Paint, go to my website and just type Miracle Paint in the search box or rust repair, and that will take you to the full product line of rust repair products that we carry.